My name's Neil Turner. I work for Ecological Building Systems, and what we mostly do is the ProClima wind-tight breather membranes and airtight vapor control membranes. We also sell a range of natural insulation fibre. So what I'm going to show you today is a product called Thermo Hemp Combi-Jute. So it's a mixture of natural hemp crop combined with jute, and the jute actually comes from recycled cocoa bags. So the Ritter Chocolate Group, they import their cocoa from South America, and instead of landfilling the bags and when they decompose you get lots of carbon emission, they supply them to a company called Thermo Nature that converts them into these insulation bats, flexible bats. But as I mentioned before, we get a lot of inquiries from clients who've got existing timber floors, suspended timber floors, and it's cold. Now, whether it's either insulated or not, they still say it's cold. And one of the main things about this system is that with a suspended timber floor, you've normally got some kind of airflow. Sometimes people, if they have insulation, they use chicken wire. And I believe B&Q recommend that you should suspend your insulation with chicken wire. But what happens then is that you get this cold air that's kind of creating a sort of wind washing or thermal bypass through your insulation and up through the floor. And if you've got no insulation, it's going to be even worse. So the whole basis of this system is that you have a wind-tight breather membrane. So this is called ProClima Solitex Plus. It's moisture vapor open, and I always say that it's like a Gore-Tex jacket. So in other words, you don't sweat, but it's also wind-tight. It's a monolithic membrane. So it's stopping any air coming through, but it's allowing any moisture vapor to harmlessly diffuse out so you don't get any moisture buildup. And then this top membrane is your airtight vapor control membrane. It's kind of retarding any moisture vapor transferring from inside outside by diffusion. So you're not getting any buildup of condensation here. So this is the sort of main basis of the system. So this is like a mock-up of a sort of twin skin brick cavity wall. In many cases you can't get below the floor, so this is where you're installing from above. So the first thing to do is to install this membrane. So you're creating a kind of tray. So you're doing like a castle effect where you're going over the joist, down, across, up. And then what you have to do to keep this continuous airtight line, you're then taping the overlaps of the membrane. So these tapes are solid acrylic glue tapes, and they're pressure activated. So what you have to do when you apply them, you have to press down. And then after about an hour, they start to cure, and after 24 hours, they're quite difficult actually. You'll never get them off. So what you're doing is you're keeping everything continuous. And then what happens is when you get to the perimeter where the floor meets the wall, the important thing there is that you don't get any channeling of air where the membrane meets the wall. So what you have to do is tape the membrane to the wall as well. So you're kind of lapping up the membrane and then taping. So this tape here, it's got a fleecy backing. It's called Contiga Solido SL. What you can do with this, it's a really nice tape because the fleecy backing gives a nice key for plaster. So you can actually plaster over it on top of it. Or you can just hide the tape with your skirting. There's a lot of different features that you see in floors. So if you look at this detail here on the corner, you've actually got your floor joist here, and it's pretty close to the wall. So that can make the membrane slightly difficult to apply. So what's happened here is the membrane's kind of been lapped down, and you've kind of created a little U-channel where you can fit some insulation. And then what you're then going to do is cover over with this membrane over the top and then tape. What you see here is a pipe penetration. You've got to puncture this membrane. So that's an EPDM grommet you see there. So this kind of self-seals so that this penetration is actually airtight. It's also, these products are used for things like soil pipe penetrations, and there's also smaller ones for wires as well. This is a product called Caflex Post. So what happens here is sometimes you can't get to the end of the pipe. So what you can do is you can actually fit that around the pipe and seal. And you can also tape as well, which can be a bit fiddly, but this is a kind of easier way of doing it. What you see here is that, you know, maybe somebody's looking to fit some pipes. So maybe you've got some grooves. So you can actually sort of seal. This is a sort of flexible waterproof membrane. It's normally used for, it's used instead of EPDM under windowsills because externally on a window frame. So it's a kind of malleable, I call it like a Play-Doh tape. So it's a very good tape for sort of bending around pipes and things like that. So in terms of this whole system, we get quite a lot of clients who ask about, well, I'm looking to install underfloor heating. So the kind of ones that we come across mostly are the kind of groove chipboard. So you have the sort of chipboard with grooves in and then the pipes just sit in. And you can actually put your groove chipboard on the top of this system and then just install the pipes. Sometimes you have winged trays. So if you can imagine you've got a tray with wings and then you have a little sort of indent where the pipes can run. In that scenario, this comes in a number of different thicknesses. So you may have to leave use a 20 mil thinner section that the tray can then sit on. When you're using trays, your aluminium tray is acting like a vapor control layer. And to make that airtight, you can just tape at the joints of the wings. And in that case, you wouldn't necessarily use this membrane because it would be difficult to fit. One thing I will say is it's important to have good airflow underneath. So quite a lot of people, when they're suffering from sort of air coming up through the floor, there's a tendency to block these vents off. So if you're going to insulate, the advice always is to make sure that you've got airflow. And if these vents are actually maybe almost being blocked by the insulation line, there are kind of trays that you can buy where you can divert the air through. So that's an important thing. The other thing to bear in mind with floors, always check that, you know, what kind of damp that you get underneath. If you've got like a high water table and this area here gets flooded constantly, then you might need to think again about what kind of system you'd use. It may be that this kind of system isn't the best one to think of, but it's very rare that that happens. Sometimes you can get quite a lot of rising just moisture vapor, and what some people do in that scenario, you're just going to put maybe 1,000 gauge polythene on the floor. So it's kind of sort of limiting any rising damp so that there's not too much moisture. Another thing I'd like to show you, where you've got things like joist ends penetrating, obviously this is an air path. So, you know, what you're looking to do is seal these joist ends. And the old way of doing it would be to tape around these joist ends. Now people still do that, you can still do that, but now there's been the development of liquid membranes that can either be brushed or you can spray. So Proclima, who supplies this, they've developed this Aerofix gun. I mean, if you're doing this as a one-off, you may not buy this, but if you're a builder who's doing quite a few of these, this is a really handy tool because it has a spray nozzle. So you can either spray or you can actually create a bead. So where you've got trying to seal this area here, you can actually run beads of the liquid around and then brush around, and that's your airtight seal. So the normal one is to cover gaps of up to 3 mil, but if you've got gaps of up to 20 mil, there is a fibrous version. So this is a kind of summary of the system.